This is Chapter 9, Lecture 4, and in this lecture, we will be discussing Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka in our continuing discussion of South Asia. We'll start with Pakistan. Pakistan was created, became independent from the British in 1947 and is a 96% Islamic region. At the time of the independence, a west and an east region of the nation was formed on the east and the west of India. The western region is closer to the Middle East in culturally and many other forms economically, whereas the east region is closer to Southeast Asia and has a much more tropical, wet environment and has many more similarities to Southeast Asia. There was a tenuous beginning of Pakistan with this separation of the country into two regions. The East gained independence from the West in 1971 and was renamed Bangladesh. There are tensions in Pakistan with India in the Jammu and Kashmir regions. There is battling over the water rights of the upper tributaries and reaches of the Indus River. The region itself, many people want to become independent from India. India currently controls the region, and Pakistan has provided rebels with military equipment and has fed a lot of fighting and civil war type activities in this particular region of far northern India. The fact that both Pakistan and India have nuclear warheads also makes tension in this region much more tenuous. Post 9/11, 2001 relationship with the United States and the Al-Qaeda fight was improved, although still shaky. It continues to rank as one of the world's poorest countries, one of the largest debtor nations. Its agriculture is based on wheat, rice, leather products, carpet. The country is located in a transitional region between Islamic Middle East and Hindu India. It's considered a dysfunctional country with very little evidence of civil society. Here's a map of Pakistan that shows the primary agricultural regions and secondary agricultural regions. This is from your text on page 439. We see the southern region around Karachi, the main port for the country, agriculture along the Indus River, wider spread agriculture in the upper reaches of the Indus River. The deserts to the west have little to no agriculture. Industry accounts for only about 25.8% of the GDP value added, and over half of the country's exports depend on textiles and clothing production. Pakistan has extensive energy resources, including natural gas, but it lacks the domestic investment and capital needed to develop these resources. Therefore, it has to import much of its energy needs today. Foreign direct investment is minimal, as Pakistan is not perceived to be an attractive country for multinational corporations. The annual average growth rate of agricultural production has steadily declined, and Pakistan is forced to import a significant amount of its food for the past several decades to make up that difference. The main reason for the lack of progress in agricultural development and the resulting food insecurity is the power of the conservative feudal landlord class. A mere 2% of Pakistan's richest landlords control a quarter of the country's land, and millions of serf-like peasant farmers depend on the landlords for survival. Because agricultural productivity is less of a concern for the landlords than the social prestige and political power that land ownership conveys, maintaining soil fertility and preventing the accumulation of yield-reducing salts in the soil has also proved a serious challenge. Another obstacle to economic growth is the substantial ethnic and regional tensions resulting from the country's transitional location between Islamic Middle East and Hindu India. Each of the three dominant ethnic classes are the Punjabis, 42% in the northeast part of the country, the Pashtuns, with 17% of the population in the northwest, and the Sindhis in the south with about 14% of the population. Pakistan is a federal state, but the provinces often resent central government power because it's largely in control of the economy. Islamabad controls economic resources. Punjabis in this region produce much of the wheat for the country and dominate the country's heavy-handed military and civilian bureaucracy. The Sindh province is a major agricultural and industrial region to the south and includes the largest urban area and leading financial center of Karachi. Also, it's Pakistan's main seaport. Despite the economic and political power these assets provide, Sindh also feels economically shortchanged by the central government. Riots have been common in Karachi over these issues. More recently, sectarian violence has broken out between majority Sunni and minority Shia, and their religious leaders develop extremist views. And of course, the conflicts in Afghanistan and Kashmir also hamper Pakistan's economic development. Many refugees have fled into Pakistan from Afghanistan, as Afghanistan has suffered a series of wars, including those involving the United States. Let's move to Nepal now. Nepal, it can be kind of divided into three regions that run from east to west. Each region runs from east to west. The southern region is the lower elevation. It has a more tropical-like environment and tends to be Hindu in religious affiliation, much more like India, and is agriculturally like much of India along the Ganges River plain. The Central Valley region, including Kathmandu, is more temperate, cooler temperature. This is where the largest majority of the population resides. Also a highly agricultural region. And then you have the mountains running from east to west or west to east in the northern third of the country, making up for a strong adventure tourism economy. Nepal is landlocked. This creates physical and cultural transition between Tibet in the north and India to the south. And of course, it must rely on other countries to transport goods and services for import and for export. The most populated part is the central foothills, including the Kathmandu Valley. It has had worldwide success in marketing its natural and cultural heritage. In adventure tourism, mountain climbing, tourism industry creates substantial domestic employment opportunities. At least 75% of the population are involved in subsistence agriculture. Much of this is done on small plots by women. There are exacerbated demands on women in the agricultural economy. There has been an overuse of the forest and much illegal timbering. This results in erosion and makes agriculture more difficult, and also makes it more difficult to obtain fuel and water, as the women must travel greater and greater distances all the time to obtain fuel, wood for fuel and water for daily use. Men have been forced to move to the lowlands where there's more work available in agriculture and in small amounts of industry. Nepal has considerable scope for exploiting its potential hydroelectric power, but political uncertainty and a difficult business climate have hampered foreign investment. However, Nepal and India signed trade and investment agreements in 2014 that will increase Nepal's hydroelectric power production. Nepal, remember, also was the site of a large earthquake in April of 2015 that displaced many people in the region around the Kathmandu Valley. It is in a tectonically active region with earthquakes also resulting in minimizing investments. Bangladesh is the former East Pakistan before the 1971 Civil War of Pakistan. That same period, a great cyclone ran up the Bay of Bengal into Bangladesh in 1971, resulted in sharply reduced agricultural economy. Its economy rests almost completely in agriculture. It has poorly developed industrial economy, but it does have a relatively stable government. Child labor is widespread and common. Half the rural population is landless, and there's a high rate of illiteracy. Here's a map of land utilization in Bangladesh from page 442 of your text. And in looking at it, we see the lower river valleys, and these are very low elevation. We see rice is very common, and jute. Jute as a crop is actually used to make things like burlap bags, also used for heavy upholstery, curtains, things of that nature, blankets. There is coconut along kind of the tropical corner here in the eastern part of the Bay of Bengal. Cotton is grown on some of the moderate beginning slopes of the edge of the Himalayas and into towards Southeast Asia. We have tea in some of the higher elevations is commonly grown. Wheat and barley as we move more inland from the delta of the Ganges here, the Sundarban region. Grazing is also on some of the marginal, more hilly lands, and forest. Here we see the mangrove forest of the Sundarbans in the southwestern part of the country, and in the higher elevations, as we tend in the foothills of the Himalayas and other mountains, we see forest also as part of the agriculture and land use. Tropical forests tend to be more common here in the southernmost reaches. There is a moderately well-developed transportation system for highways and railroads in particular that are a result of former British colonization. It is very close to the old industrial region of Calcutta in India, causing pollution from that city and the industry in that region to drift across the delta, especially during the dry monsoon season. We see some areas of relatively unused land as well in the Sundarbans. The Sundarbans we'll talk about here next. But keep in mind that things like the mangrove forest help protect this extreme lowland region, very wide delta region, transition into the Bay of Bengal. When the cyclones come up the Bay of Bengal, having a strong mangrove forest helps protect the land and maintain the delta itself. Threats to the Sundarban. This is discussed on page 445 of your text. The Sundarban, the delta region of the Ganges, is a 220-mile delta. The Brahmaputra, Meghna, and rivers and Ganges rivers all flow into this delta. The and also part of the delta is in the West Bengal state of India, near Calcutta's shipping and industrial center. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world, accounts for a large percentage of reserve forest land, timber, and fuel wood for Bangladesh. It's the home to wildlife such as the Bengal tiger, crocodiles, and a wide variety of fish and other animals. It is a very important fishing resource. Much of the source water today is now diverted by India for its uses in agriculture, hydroelectric power generation, and industry. The area is barely above sea level. The Delta region is often flooding during the wet monsoon seasons, and rising ocean levels can result in saltwater intrusion and also flood the Delta in the decades to come if the oceans continue to rise due to climate change. Here's the Damodar Valley and threats to the Sundarbans. We see the Sundarban region here, Calcutta here, much industry in this region, old and unimproved industrial complexes are through this region, high polluting, both the water as well as the air especially during the dry monsoon. We see that there's a whole series of braided channels amidst all the rivers in this region. And let's talk about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is at 20 million people in population and about the size of West Virginia. 74% of the population are Sinhalese. They speak an Indo-Aryan language and are generally Buddhist. The Tamil-speaking Hindus, who actually settled much of the region earlier, account for the rest of the population. There are often cultural conflicts between the two, and there have been numerous civil wars in recent times, even into the current century. Sri Lanka gained independence from Britain in 1948. The name was changed from Ceylon to Sri Lanka in 1972. Government programs have significantly improved health and education. The United Nations Human Development Index, HDI, is the highest in all of South Asia. There are some social indicators that are on par with developed countries. And agricultural exports account for about a third of the economy. Textile and garment industry accounts for 35% of gross domestic product. This map of Sri Lanka is on page 444 of your text. One of the first things I want to point out are these red dotted lines, area here in the north and here to the east. These are areas of Tamil dominance, that smaller 14% of the population. These are regions where most of the civil conflict has been occurring in the past few decades. We see scattered rice production and extensive forest with shifting agriculture through the majority of the island. We see corn and millet grown to the north and some of the elevations starting to rise into the highest mountains in the southern part of the island, south central part of the island. Coconuts along the more tropical region of the west coast. Tea in some of the higher mountain elevations is commonly grown. Colombo is the largest city and also has the greatest amount of industrial activity. We see railroad development that has been based more on agricultural production than any other kind of infrastructure development, and limited highway development as well. That's it for Chapter 9. Let's have a summary of the chapter. South Asia is culturally diverse in terms of in terms of religion, ethnicity, and language. all of which are a byproduct of centuries of migration into the region. Relatively high population growth rates hamper economic and social development, but are not by themselves the cause of poverty in the region. The absence of economic opportunities in agriculture has led to substantial rural to urban migration, and this movement in part explains the growth of some of the largest urban regions in the world. In India, the unequal spread of the benefits of globalization only exacerbates these income inequities, as capital-intensive information industries, rather than more traditional and labor-intensive export-based consumer product industries, have captured the overwhelming attention of the state and national governments. Equally critical to the development growth is the future state of South Asia's environment. In part explained by the rapid growth of population, South Asia's dwindling water resources pose serious problems to agriculture and industrial development. That's it for Chapter 9, and we'll pick up again on the next lecture as we go into Chapter 10.